Hello everyone, welcome to Election Ketwill, and we are going to be discussing the current state of the 2024 presidential race, according to the polls just 1 month before the election. I most recently made an election prediction on October 1st, so I wasn't able to wait until exactly 1 month out from the election. I wish I could have done so, but today I've decided to take a look at what the polls are telling us. This will be a snapshot in time to understand the averages of the polls in both battleground states and some of the more competitive non-battleground states, so we can generally gauge where we stand and what the current state of the race is. These polls are essentially the only data points we have before the election is conducted and concluded in just over a month. I've been really excited to see what the data presents, but I haven't yet mapped out every single battleground state. So, we'll be doing this together in real time, focusing on the 229 electoral votes that haven't been characterized on this map yet. I've done my due diligence in categorizing some states that are going to be more competitive or are already likely decided, but don't have many substantive polls. Alaska, South Carolina, and Maine at large are examples of such states. Alaska, in particular, has an interesting poll from the most accurate pollster in the 2022 cycle and the special elections, showing Donald Trump in single digits, a reduction in support compared to the 2016 and 2020 elections. That's not entirely surprising, as Alaska has shifted a little more to the left in recent years. What's particularly interesting is that this poll shows Trump under 5 points, a significant decline from 2020. Since there aren't many other major pollsters or high-quality polls, referred to as A polls based on their ratings, I decided to move forward from that. Now, we'll be focusing on the 229 electoral votes where we actually have substantive polling data to help us better understand the current state of the race. Democrats begin with 183 electoral votes from their safe and likely states, while Republicans start with 126. So, we'll be filling in the remaining competitive states, which make up a large portion of the electoral map. We'll start by looking at the national numbers, then go state by state, beginning with the West Coast and moving eastward. Nationally, Kamala Harris is up by 2.5%, a slight reduction from when she was up 3 points in earlier polls. Her lead has fluctuated over time. At one point, she was up 3.3%, then 2.9%, 2.7%, and 2.8%. Now, she's up 2.5%, still maintaining a lead. While it's a much closer race than at different times, it's still highly competitive. Many of the battleground states are just as close, if not closer, than the national head-to-head numbers. Now, let's dive into the states. We'll start with Nevada, the first state we'll categorize as either red or blue. Currently, Kamala Harris leads by 0.9%. This state has fluctuated a lot, with Trump holding a lead at different points and maintaining it over Joe Biden for months. Now that Harris leads by 0.9%, this is quite significant for her campaign, showing clear improvement compared to where Biden was. Donald Trump is currently leading by 1.4% in another battleground state that has fluctuated significantly. Kamala Harris had the advantage throughout most of August, but Trump took the lead back in September, with the state flipping back and forth at the end of the month. Now that we're into October, Trump has expanded his lead to 1.4%. That's where things stand in that particular battleground state. Moving over to New Mexico, Kamala Harris maintains an 88.2% lead. I want to cover this alongside Colorado, where we don't have a lot of recent polling, but Harris has double-digit leads. Harris plus 15, Harris plus 10, Harris plus 11. The average puts her well ahead by double digits. Compared to 2020, New Mexico shows a slight reduction in support, while Colorado is roughly on par with the 2020 results, with a slight reduction as well. In total, this puts Kamala Harris at 204 electoral votes when we account for those states. Next, we'll look at Texas, which has shown strong polling for the Democratic nominee in the Senate race. However, Trump still maintains a 6.4% advantage in the state, which is actually better than his 2020 performance when he won Texas by 5.6%. So, while Harris has improved on Biden's numbers, Trump still leads by a margin that makes Texas a likely Republican state. That leaves 157 electoral votes remaining, with Trump closing the gap due to Texas being such a populous state. The next area to examine is Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. Nebraska is one of only 2 states in the country that allocate electoral votes by congressional district. Harris has shown strong numbers here, with polls from CNN SSRS showing her up by 11 points and New York Times Siena College showing her up by 9 points. Across the board, Harris leads by a larger margin than Biden did in 2020, making this a likely Democratic district. That gives Harris one more electoral vote. Turning to Iowa, there haven't been many strong polls out of the state, but Trump's average lead hovers around 5.5%, which is enough to place Iowa in the likely Republican column. This brings Trump's total to 183 electoral votes. On the flip side, in Minnesota, Harris holds a 5.7% lead, just enough to push it into the likely Democratic category, bringing Harris to 215 electoral votes. As we continue filling out the remaining states, the race is tightening, with only 140 toss-up electoral votes left. Moving on to Wisconsin, Harris holds a 1.6% lead, making this a lean Democratic state. This is an improvement compared to earlier points in the campaign, but a slight reduction from her stronger performance in August when she was up by 4 points following the Democratic National Convention and her vice presidential announcement. Now she is up by 2 points, showing a slight decline. In Michigan, Kamala Harris still maintains an advantage, though it's smaller than it was in August when her lead was stronger. Today, her lead is 1.5%, making it a lean Democratic state. This brings her to 240 electoral votes. Next, let's move on to Florida, a state we didn't initially expect to be a battleground until recent polling showed it narrowing significantly. Donald Trump currently holds a 4-point lead here, which is a slight reduction from previous polls. Although some states show opposite trends, Florida has remained largely in the lean Republican category, and this latest data supports that. With its 30 electoral votes, Trump's total rises to 213. Now, let's take a look at Ohio. Both Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have struggled against Donald Trump here. Harris's numbers show a slight reduction in support from 2020, mirroring trends seen in other battleground states. Although she's underperforming Biden's 2020 results in Ohio, she's still leading in other states by larger margins. Trump's advantage in Ohio makes it a lean Republican state. Moving to Georgia, Trump leads by 1.3%. This state has also fluctuated, with Trump initially leading, losing the lead, and then regaining it. Now he's back ahead by a lean margin. This puts Trump slightly ahead of Harris in the overall count. The next state to examine is North Carolina, where Trump holds a slim lead of less than a percentage point. This brings Trump's total to 262 electoral votes, while Harris remains at 240. The final states to consider are Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New Hampshire. Starting with Virginia, Harris holds a 6.7% lead. While this is a reduction from Biden's 2020 margin, it still qualifies Virginia as a likely Democratic state, adding 13 electoral votes to Harris's tally, bringing her to 253. In New Hampshire, Harris leads by 7 points, slightly underperforming compared to Biden's 7-point victory in 2020, but still within a similar range. The state's 4 electoral votes go to Harris, bringing her total to 257. Now it all comes down to Pennsylvania, the most critical battleground state. With 19 electoral votes, Pennsylvania has seen massive investment from both campaigns, with each spending over $100 million. In this decisive state, Harris leads by a razor-thin margin of 0.6%. This gives her the final electoral votes needed to reach 276, narrowly securing the presidency. This result highlights just how close and competitive this election has been, especially in key battleground states like Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, which proved pivotal in determining the outcome. As we discussed earlier, Harris's path to victory was always going to hinge on these battleground states, and today's analysis confirms that. And we're going to dive into the current state of the 2024 presidential race, according to the latest polls. It feels a bit strange to see the electoral map looking very similar to how it was before, with only slight differences in Michigan and Pennsylvania. However, this race has largely stayed consistent over the past few months. Even when it was Biden, this was his pathway to the presidency. A lot of the support Harris has lost stems from the same issues that existed in 2020 and weren't fully addressed by 2024. Maybe if Harris had been the nominee from the beginning, things would have looked different. That said, her campaign, which launched on July 21st, is now within striking distance, if not the most likely outcome, being a victory for Kamala Harris. What's particularly interesting is how little the numbers in these battleground states have fluctuated. Even before the first presidential debate between Biden and Trump, these figures looked very similar. Trump might have had the advantage before, and now Harris does, but the swing has been no more than 3 points across the battleground states. This shows that even before Biden dropped out of the race, this was always destined to be a close and competitive election. What this election tells us is that neither side can afford to be complacent. It's incredibly competitive. and no one truly knows how it's going to play out. Republicans argue that Trump has been underestimated every time he's been on the ballot, and they believe Harris's narrow leads won't be enough to stop Trump from overcoming her in the final tally. Democrats, on the other hand, argue that in the post-Roe v. Wade era, the polls have underestimated the impact of newly energized voters, particularly those motivated by issues like abortion and reproductive rights. This election is going to spark a lot of post-election analysis about what drove the victory, whether it was Harris or Trump who ultimately won. The polls give us a glimpse into how close this race will be and how long it might drag on. We are truly in for a wild ride, and it's exciting to see that elections now require deeper thought and conversation rather than simply predicting a landslide. In 2020, we were on track for a strong victory for Biden, and the same seemed true for 2024 before Harris became the nominee. Now, both parties have to fight for every vote. Neither side is in a position to relax or assume any state is safe. I'm particularly interested in seeing how Georgia flips back to the Republican Party, along with Arizona, while North Carolina shows a reduced margin for Trump. We're also seeing a reduction in support for Harris in Pennsylvania, but an expansion of support for her in Wisconsin. In Minnesota, Tim Walz and Harris are performing worse than Biden did in 2020, despite the sitting governor being on the ticket. New Hampshire shows a slight underperformance for Harris, but it's only by 0.4%, while Virginia has seen a nearly 4-point shift since 2020. Overall, the polls present a mixed bag for both parties, and neither side is gaining a significant advantage. That's why this election is shaping up to be one of the closest in American history, possibly even closer than the 2000 election, which ended 271 to 266. If Nevada flips away from Harris, this could be one of the tightest races we've ever seen. We're just a margin of error away from that being our reality. We'll continue to track these polls over the coming weeks to see how they fluctuate, because in the final stretch of the campaign, every week counts. With just 30 days left until the presidential election, we're in for a very close and competitive race, one that will be studied and remembered for years to come. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the bell to stay informed as we dive deeper into the race. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.